Hi, everybody. I'm Carolyn Waters, the director and head librarian, and I want to welcome you all to the New York Society Library for this event tonight. Those of you in person, and we have a nice crowd, which is great, and those of you on the live stream. As we begin, we acknowledge that the library stands on the traditional land of the Lenape people, to whom we pay respect. I wanted to say it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome Gretchen Rubin and Alexandra Horowitz. Both are longtime library members, so library lovers here, which is great. Talk to them about the library. And both exceptional researchers and writers who use the library a lot. So we're really thrilled to have them here and have all of you here. And we want to say, for those of you who are not familiar with the library, maybe this is your first time here, to definitely check out our website, add your name to our mailing list. We have a wonderful slate of programs and a lot of fun things going on here. And also we serve tea at 3 every afternoon. Okay, let me welcome Alexandra Horowitz, is a senior research fellow and adjunct associate professor at Barnard College, specializing in canine cognition. She's written books about dogs, as you might expect, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Inside of a Dog: What Dogs See, Smell, and Know, and her most recent book, The Year of the Puppy: How Dogs Become Themselves. Her studies also include how humans experience the world, particularly with her book, On Looking: 11 Walks with Expert Eyes. Her past library events include a wonderful 2017 conversation with fellow scientist Stuart Firestein about olfaction called How We Smell. So we think she is the perfect partner to speak with Gretchen Rubin about Gretchen's latest book, Life in 5 Senses: How Exploring the Senses Got Me Out of My Head and Into the World. Gretchen Rubin has been a trustee of this library since 2017 and is also the best-selling author of The Happiness Project, or Why I Spent a Year Trying to Sing in the Morning, Clean My Closets, Fight Right, Read Aristotle, and Generally Have More Fun, as well as Happier at Home, Better Than Before, The 4 Tendencies, and Outer Order, Inner Calm. She has also written acclaimed biographical works on Winston Churchill and John F. Kennedy and is the host of the popular podcast Happier with Gretchen Rubin. We have copies of tonight's books for sale by Sasha from the corner bookstore. Wave to Sasha back there. He's just outside the room, and I assume that our authors would be very happy to sign them afterward. There's also a link for those of you on the live stream to purchase the books online. Please welcome Alexandra Horowitz and Gretchen Rubin.
But first, we have to say how much we love the library. Both of us. We were like comparing which desks we use in the stacks.
Exactly. If you're a member and you haven't spent a lot of time in the stacks yet, if you're a new member, that's where you need to go next, right? Yeah. Tomorrow morning. Yeah. Otherwise, yes.
Enjoy the smell of the library as you're coming out of the elevator. It's like, oh, New York Society Library smell. Yes.
So. That's a great segue. Smell is a good entree here. Gretchen, it's delightful to be here with you, and I am particularly charmed by this book myself, personally, because I feel like we have a lot of overlap in our work and interests, even though it wouldn't seem like it on its face, right? And actually, that's where I want to start before we get a little bit into the meat of the book. You know, I've written about dogs, I write about attention. Here you're writing about the 5 senses, you've written about happiness. I wonder how you think we've gotten to this place where what should be the base foundation of living, happiness, and how we use our senses, and sort of being aware and perceptive, how that's been overlooked, right? And how we have to come to it again in these works.
Well, I think right now there's sort of 2 influences that are pointing in the opposite direction but reinforce each other. I think on the one hand, things can feel very flat and drained. So like you're talking to people behind a screen and everything feels sort of distant and out of touch. But on the other hand, things feel sort of hyper-processed. So every potato chip has been engineered to hit every bliss point. Or you're watching a movie, and so you're seeing images, more images than you would ever naturally see. And there's a soundtrack, so there's all this emotion through sound, but there's no wind in your face, there's no smell. And so things feel sort of oversaturated and undersaturated. And I think that's why anything, now immersive is like the magical word that everybody uses. Like the Museum of Natural History has an immersive exhibit, and, Crate and Barrel has an immersive store. And everything, I think we're just so hungry for it, because this feeling of like really being able to have like a natural flooding of your senses just feels so appealing.
Right. And then it's almost difficult to experience ordinary life and appreciate it for its richness, because we're accustomed to everything being oversaturated. That's interesting. For you, the project began with an eye exam.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So everybody here is sort of like, this neighborhood. So I was going to my eye doctor. It was about like 6 blocks away from here. And I walked over there because I had a bad case of pink eye. And as I was getting ready to leave, he said to me very casually, like, be sure to wear your sunscreen. He said, well, be sure to come back for your checkup, because as you know, you're more at risk for losing your vision. And I was in shock. I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't know that. And he said, oh, yeah, well, you're so severely nearsighted. You're at risk for having a detached retina, and that could affect your vision. And I have a friend who lost some of his vision to a detached retina, so that felt very real to me. So I was just stunned. I walk out into the street. I'm looking around, up and down Fifth Avenue into Central Park, and I'm thinking, this is so precious to me. Because so often we don't appreciate something until we think about that we've lost it, or we fear we might lose it. And then I thought, but I didn't notice any of this on my walk over. I was completely oblivious to it. I was so stuck in my head. And then at that moment, kind of in that moment of realization, it was like every knob in my head got jammed up to 11. And I could, every detail that I was seeing came into focus. Every sound was on a separate track. Every smell, all the different smells. New York is smelly, as I'm sure you've noticed. It all just was flooding over it for my whole walk home. And it was just this transcendent and almost psychedelic experience. But I realized this is happening all the time. I'm just not paying any attention to it. And that just showed me how far I had come from really kind of engaging with my 5 senses in any kind of real way. And so then I thought, okay, this is it. This is my next.
Naturally,
research is me search for me.
Yeah.
So turned it into a project.
So, and you took, just to pause on it for a moment, you took this Aristotelian idea of the 5 senses, right?
Yes.
Just the first 5. Why did you ignore some of the other proprioception, the feeling of the body in space, or kinesthesia, et cetera?
You could call them the Aristotelian senses or the kindergarten senses, whichever one appeals to you. But, there's a glamour to the big 5. We know them. We're aware of them. We talk about them all the time. The other ones, proprioception, these more subtle senses are extraordinarily important. And play such a role in our sense of well-being, but we are not aware of them unless something goes wrong. It's like breathing. It's only when something goes wrong that you really become aware of it. So I decided to really focus on the glamour of the big 5.
I would like to see a chapter on proprioception, though.
I started one. Yes, I did.
What did you start to explore?
I looked into all of them, and then I had 11 senses because I was going to make up my own senses, like the sense of imagination, and I was, and then I thought, what, I think 5 is enough. I'll stick to the big 5.
It is enough, it's
a lot.
And you have rich detail in each of these chapters. So I'd like to go a little bit through a few of them. Hopefully we'll get time to hit all of them.
Okay.
But I also want to have time for some questions. So I'm going to start with my sort of big 3 of the top 5.
Good.
And the first one is vision, of course, right?
Right.
When I think of vision, I think of the fact that vision is created. In other words, at some level, we're editing all the time, right? There are things that we aren't noticing our noses, even though they're constantly in our vision, right? And we're filling in. We have this blind spot in all our vision, which our brain is filling in information for. So what does this mean to you when you think, well, I have to start to look harder?
Yeah. No, and that, just sort of your general point is something that really surprised me in the whole study of the 5 senses, is how much each one of us lives in our own sensory world. You think, we're all in this room. It's an objective room. We're all feeling the same thing. We're all seeing the same thing. And we are not. Because you could say, well, some people are colorblind. Okay, of course. But what about the dress? Remember the dress? How many people saw white and gold? That was me. Do you remember this from 15? How many people saw white and gold? Yeah? Yes. How many people saw blue and black? Okay, you're right. It is blue and black. I cannot see it as blue and black. But in New York, like sirens, because I record a podcast, my producer will often stop me and say, "Oh, there's a siren," but I don't hear the siren because we hear them all the time. So our brain just blends it out. He said, but she said in Los Angeles it's helicopters. They don't hear helicopters because there's so many helicopters. Yeah. So this idea that we don't see.
There's not just one thing to see.
There's not just one thing to see, or if you know, and we've all had that experience where. If you get a dog, all of a sudden the Petco jumps out at you, which you never noticed before because your brain is signaling to you that it's important information. So it's all being edited all the time, and that was very surprising to me.
Yeah, I love that idea of the tension when I became pregnant. Suddenly, I noticed a lot of pregnant women.
Yes,
and I'm like, amazing.
Yes,
this is the time, I guess.
Yeah. We're all doing it right now.
Always so many pregnant women around.
Yeah. But with vision, because it is the most. Sometimes people are saying like, oh, we're in the West, so that's why we're so sight focused. But really, it's human hardwiring. It really takes up the most real estate in our brain, and if there's a conflict among the senses, sight tends to trump. So we are kind of specially wired for sight.
So you did start to go to the Met all the time, right? And I feel like that's
Every
the
day.
perfect place to start. Tell us about your idea with visiting the Met every day and how you started looking differently.
So to me, the Met kind of represented all the richness of the world that I was not taking advantage of. And now I have the incredible fortune and privilege to have the time and the energy to go to the Met. I'm a New York City resident, so I can go for free. But I did join because we should all support institutions. And I live within walking distance of the Met. And when I told my college roommate that I was doing this, she said to me, in this very dry voice, note to self, live within walking distance of the Met. Point taken, but the fact is I'd lived within walking distance of the Met for a very long time. And I really just didn't go very much. And I knew that if I moved away, I would say to myself, why didn't I go to the Met all the time when I lived within walking distance of the Met? So it sort of loomed to me as an example of the richness of the world that I was just not reaching out to take advantage of. And I'm also very attracted to repetition and familiarity, like the kind of the potential of repetition. And so the idea of going to the Met, and I'm kind of an all or nothing person, so the idea of going every day was really exciting to me, much more than going often. And so I decided I would go every day. And here's the funny thing is, when I started that, I thought it was very idiosyncratic. But it turns out that for a fair number of people, this is a very appealing idea, to do something the same way every day. So people will do exactly the same walk with their dog. People who do forest bathing will go to the same sit spot. People will go to a river and take the same picture of the sunset at the same time every day. There's just, I think, a certain attraction to repetition. And so I really thought, well, the Met is so vast. How will it change if I go every day?
And
for a year. And it was so much fun that I've done it ever since. Yeah, I can't. I think I'll do it, for the rest of my life because it is so inexhaustible.
You walked in the Met with Sarah Z.
Yes.
An artist who just had an exhibit at the Guggenheim.
Yes, she
right?
did. Yeah.
An amazing, interesting woman, and she gave you some ideas for how to look at something that you're seeing every day and see it differently. Yeah.
No, it was really interesting to go with Sarah because one of the things that I did is I wasn't this isn't at my own self-taught art history class. I'm just going to go in and just see what I see. But Sarah was really responding to it as an artist. So she was saying things like, you have to see what's left empty. And where things enter and exit a painting, or changes in scale. That's something that I think about often. She said, you think about changes in scale, and she said, I learned that from Chinese landscapes. And if you go, the Met has such a beautiful collection of Chinese art, and you see how there is the minute there's a waterfall, and the minute that you see the human figure, the whole scale of it changes. So it was really, and then there were just paintings that I will always see differently, just because she responded to them. You can do this with a friend. You just say, take me to one of your favorite things, and then for the rest, every time you go and you walk by, you're like, oh, that's this person's favorite thing.
One of my favorite things about reading about your experience in the Met, specifically vis-a-vis vision, was your note about the stairwells and the restrooms.
Yeah.
Which was that they don't take advantage of them.
No.
Right? to be visually interesting.
They
you had ideas for them.
There's one escalator that now has something on the walls, and I'm so happy. It looks great.
Right.
Like, do this everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that you
Bump it
started
up.
looking for things
Yeah.
enough that then there was an empty space.
Yes.
And you think, well, how could we enrich this?
Yes.
Yes.
But if I could do anything, I would have a violin case and a backpack in some corner just for children who love From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley Frank Weller to find and to think, oh, there they are, they're still there.
So if we move to hearing as well, the Met also is a fertile place for that. I remember walking through the Met with a sound engineer who would record spaces, right, to be put into theatrical productions or movies to give the sound, the background sound of a space, right?
Oh,
and so we would
yeah.
go into every room at the Met, and it sounded differently. There's a sound of this room. There's a way you expect this to sound. It's kind of a live room. There's a lot of bounciness, reverberation, and other sounds, especially if they're all carpeted or really dead. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about we can all imagine a visual experience of the Met every day, but what about your aural experience, your sound experience?
Well, one of the most dramatic things that I've experienced that you can experience yourself is if you go to the Met, especially if it's a crowded day, and you know how the Great Hall is, there's cacophonous because it's so big and everything is reverberating. So if you're on the second floor and you walk around the outside of it towards, you're nodding, you know what I'm talking about, and you walk into the Asian galleries where there's that monumental Buddha and then there's the mural of the Buddha of medicine, the sound drops. It's like all of a sudden it's so much more hushed. You can like literally in the space of a step feel it's not silent because it's still open to all that noise, but there's a dramatic change. And because I felt, and I didn't realize it at first what I was noticing, because I was like, why is this such a reverent space? This feels like a very kind of holy place, more than other places in the Met. And I realized it's because you go through this dramatic change in sound, so it gives you this feeling like, ooh, you're entering into a new zone. And then there's just this monumental Buddha. And so it's just such an effective way of how subtle is it? It's not that subtle once you notice. For someone like me, I really had to, it took like 6 months before I could put my finger on what it was that was giving me that feeling through my senses, but it's very dramatic.
So I love that you're invoking silence as somewhat spiritual. In New York, we're always looking for silence.
Seeking it.
Is there any such thing?
In the Met?
In New York. Did you find silence? Can you find silence? Or is there always something to hear?
Well, that's interesting because in Central Park, I spent a lot of time in Central Park, and like there were places where I'm like, oh, it's so quiet here. But then if you really listen, you're like, it's not quiet at all. By anybody else's, there is a lot of noise.
Well,
even
that's
like
the other component,
even your
noise.
building, like my building,
Yes.
I realized I can hear the service elevator. It's sort of like I have a really little building, and I'm like, I kind of know what all my neighbors are doing because I'm like, oh, the service elevator stopped at 3, without even noticing. You're just more aware. Yeah.
And did you, if you're focusing on sound, I don't know, did you do these linearly or did you do them together, right? Like you go and you have a visit somewhere and you're thinking about all the senses at once, or are you immersing yourself in one sense experience?
It was kind of, I would be intensely focused on one, but the others, I was always sort of looking for other experiences. And a lot of times, you can't tease it out really.
Yeah.
So,
So with sound, I was interested in the fact that you do start to talk about how noisy it is, right? And I'm also interested in that, is noise can it be recast as sound?
Right.
If you're focusing on noise and kind of collecting sounds,
right.
Can noise be something that you like?
Right.
Did any sound that you thought was noisy change into something that you're just collecting as information about your world?
What an interesting question. I never thought of that, but no. And I think maybe it is because I'm very sensitive to bad noise. I could try to reframe it like, I did find that my tolerance for bad smells went up a lot.
Yes.
Because it's just, I'm like, well, it's an interesting smell. I didn't feel that way about noise, but maybe I'll try to reframe it. But one thing that I found about silence, because I had this like silent weekend where I kicked my family, they made them go stay with my in-laws so I could just be in silence. And what I realized is that human silence is very different from utter silence. And that I found it very restorative to be in human silence. So I was still hearing the noise of the traffic. I was still hearing my service elevator. But no one was talking to me. I wasn't listening to podcasts. I wasn't watching TV. If I was outside, I would hear people talking, but no one was talking to me. And that was, I've never done, I'm going to do a silent meditation retreat. Even though I've rejected meditation twice, I'm giving it another try. But it was interesting. You didn't have to have complete silence. It didn't have to be like in a mountaintop. It was human silence. It was very restorative.
Well, it's like, John Cage's piece, right? Like as soon as you create silence, right, something fills in, and then you can reimagine what that is, right? And it maybe if without the human voice, your own head, sound of your head is amplified, or maybe not. Maybe there's a relaxation in it, right? I like that idea a lot. Well, so let's talk about that. What were some of the bad smells that you could recast?
Garbage.
And everybody wants to know how to do that.
Garbage truck. Garbage truck.
Really?
Yeah.
So how?
It's an interesting smell.
It
a
is
complex
an interesting
smell.
Right. In
But it's
summer,
a
summer
smell.
garbage truck.
Yeah. You got to walk fast. You don't want to be in there a long time. Sidewalk marijuana, right? It's just like, okay, that's like every day, 7:30 a.m. Someone's already out there. Well, one of the things I really like though is hardware store or drugstore kind of. Or I remember when she was really little, my daughter walked into Bloomingdale's. It's like, I love that department store smell, and that was the first thing that got me tuned into all the different smells in the grocery store. There's the different zones, and so I kind of like that sort of smell. They're not really good smells or bad smells, but they're distinctive smells.
Yes.
I would buy a candle of hardware store smell. I love the smell of the hardware store.
There might be such a thing, right? And
probably these days, yeah.
In the book, you represent yourself as already a little bit focused on smells and interested in smells, right? Like sort of smell.
Yes. I appreciate.
Keen.
Yes, I'm keen.
Yeah. Well, which is I think somewhat unusual, but when I was writing about dogs and smells, trying to become a better smeller myself because I am not smell keen naturally.
Oh, see, I thought you were, and that's why you wrote about it so
No,
much. I assumed you were always
not.
really interested in it.
I am because it's a dog's experience of the world.
Yes.
It's many non-humans' experience of the world, but I had my nose up in the clouds and wasn't, for me it was good or bad smells, right?
Right.
And mostly bad.
Right.
So I got more interested in just smelling for smelling's sake. But the first thing I would do to just start to explore smells was ask people about their earliest smell memories. Because largely these seem to be positive memories, right? But it also gets to the fact that we have this very positive, that we have this very strong emotional connection between smells and memory. So I wonder if you have an early smell memory you can
Oh,
share
the minute
with
you
us.
said that, it was the smell of that glue paste that you used in kindergarten.
Yes. Right,
Yeah.
right. That
Yeah.
some children ate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't eat
Yeah.
it, but I like that's probably my young, a smell that I associate with being very young.
Right.
Yeah.
I want people to just think about
Yeah.
their early smell memory. I think it's a very positive
Yeah.
association
Yeah.
usually.
Yeah. Or like the smell of your grandparents' kitchen, I think is always a good.
Yeah, right. And then you talk about how Andy Warhol had a very good idea to take advantage of this smell memory idea. Can you talk about that?
So he would, because, Andy Warhol was just obsessed with trying to hang on to memories and to sort of catalog everything, every experience, everything that everybody said or did or bought. And so he would use a perfume for just a very short amount of time and then kind of use it to remind him of that kind of little era in his life, and then he would move on to the next. And so he used it as a way to hang on to memories, like a set of memories. And a way that I've heard people do it sort of more in kind of a typical way or a way that we would do as part of ordinary life is one of the happier listeners said that she chose a perfume for her wedding. So she wore it to all of the parties, she wore it to her rehearsal dinner and her wedding, and she wore it for her honeymoon. And then every year she wears it on her anniversary. And I thought that was just such a sweet idea, and that it really would then over time just really bring you back to like everything associated with your wedding.
I think it's such a clever idea, and I'm surprised we don't do it more.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you do have some signatures, some smells that are periodic in your life.
Yeah. Well, I have a Hay Accord, which isn't even a proper perfume. It's just a building block of a perfume, and I love the smell of hay. And I wear it as my lucky smell. So I only get to wear it when I need luck. Right? Like even tonight I didn't wear it because I'm like, this is going to be fun talking to Alexandra. I don't need luck for this. I got to save it for like when I really need the luck. So I like that because it's sort of a ritual that I can do, and it's a pleasure that I can associate for when I kind of need to comfort myself and also remind myself that this is like my A game. Yeah.
I could spend a lot of time on smell, but there are a couple of other things I wanted to explore in smell, which is one of the things is you talk about unscented products, right?
Yeah.
And I think people, because of many people like me, like I used to be, now I'm very smell happy, but want to avoid smells in every case. Is unscented has become a really big phenomenon. But you say something very funny and surprising about unscented.
No, that
products.
unscented is the scent, that it's scented in order to not have a scent. And so it's not the idea that there's an absence of scent. So you've got to...
Right. So that people are really attracted to that. It's sort of like being attracted to a cleaning fluid smell. It's the feeling that they get that I'm not being affected by somebody else's smell.
Right.
I find that very interesting.
It's kind of like noise cancellation. Noise cancellation works by adding noise. So sometimes you have to undo it. Using,
I love that.
It's funny.
What about the trigeminal sense? We think of that as part of smell somewhat.
Or taste.
Right.
So that's mint or chili. I mean, it's interesting because for a lot of people, I think sadly, COVID has really increased people's appreciation, at least in the West, for the sense of smell. I think for a lot of people, it was just kind of like an add-on a sense. It was sort of like, oh, it's nice to have. It's kind of a bonus, but we don't really need it. And then when people really did lose their sense of smell, people realized like what a vital role that it plays in our sense of well-being. And I have a friend who, she really lost her sense of smell, and it's only, I think she's at 24% now. She's at a Columbia, she's part of a Columbia study. And it's a real loss. I mean, we really rely on it. But one of the things that people can do is they can try to have things that use the trigeminal stimulation to give them kind of a feeling, like more of a feeling of when they're eating, and along with texture.
And you tested your trigeminal response with the smelling salts.
Yes. This is very funny. You can buy them from Amazon. We can buy everything from Amazon. But they're called ammonia inhalants now. Okay, so smelling salts feels like for a dainty Victorian lady. Ammonia inhalants is like what a football player would have. So that's what you're buying now. But it's sort of like having like chlorinated water, rush up your nose. Like you feel like there's something dripping out of your nose, but there's not. It really does wake you up. Yeah. Have you done it?
I haven't. Should I?
It's interesting. Yeah. I wouldn't do it every day. I mean, it doesn't hurt.
But
I
like the dissociation of that experience, or the pepper experience, or the peppermint, from smell itself, right? To realize that you're not as much smelling or tasting them.
As you think.
So I like that idea. Isolating it a little bit.
Well, and the body's doing. Everything is it is a little bit artificial to split these things apart because they really they work together. And so a lot of times you think, oh, I love the way this tastes, but it's really that it has like a creamy mouthfeel that you love, or a beautiful, delicate smell, and so they're all working together.
One of the things with people who lost their sense of smell, what they appreciated, which many people do not, is how much the sense of smell is actually part of taste.
Yes. Yeah. No.
Can you describe how that is?
If you don't have your sense of smell, you're just having the big five: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And this is a really fun thing to test on yourself. So if you, especially with something like a Jelly Belly, if you put it in your mouth and you have your nose plugged, it's just you will get a very strong sweet. You'll think, wow, I really taste the sweet candy. But then if you unplug your nose, then it will become, because Jelly Bellies, they really do have very complex flavors. So it's like popcorn or, root beer, but you don't experience that until you unplug your nose because it's really your sense of smell that's doing it.
Retronasal.
Yeah. And what's fun, though, too, fun with your own body, is just like we see, like having two eyes gives us, we can see things in 3 dimensions, and having 2 ears allows us to identify where sounds are coming from. you actually smell slightly different with your two nostrils. And I used to think it was like an affectation when people would go like this, like that's just like a thing they did to look fancy. But no, that's a very practical thing to do because you do smell slightly differently. And if you can like take something that like that has a lot of smell, you can see that it will have a slightly different smell with your two nostrils.
So in the taste realm, I was going to bring you some Heinz ketchup.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Oh,
because
I'm dressed in my ketchup outfit because I'm such a fan of ketchup
why
now.
Why do you love this ketchup so much?
Okay, this is the thing. Heinz ketchup. We invoke it as like this kind of throwaway condiment that people glop onto stuff, but ketchup is magic. It is one of the very rare foods that has all 5 tastes. It's sweet, it's sour, it's bitter, it's salty, and it's umami. And that is very, very hard to. I mean, I tried to think of more. I actually asked on social media for a bunch of it, and people could easily get to 3. And there's a few things that get to 4, like a margarita gets to 4, but it doesn't have umami. It's very hard to have all 5. And I think that's why it's the secret ingredient in so many food, like pad thai. Mm-hmm. Did you know that? Pad thai is basically noodles with ketchup. And because it's so complex, and if you really just taste a little bit of it, it will blow your mind. It's so rich and complex. It's a beautiful color. It has a great texture. It has like an aftertaste. It's so much going on.
I love this advertisement for the ketchup.
Yes.
I hope everybody goes home and tries a little bit.
Yeah. No,
I mean, in fact, and also...
And I don't eat sugar, so for me, have ketchup is like, I almost never have it, except for me, I'm like, this is amazing. Yeah.
Now, when people think about smell, they usually think about the Proustian memory, but in some ways, it's a taste memory, right?
Yeah.
The Proustian connection.
Yes. Yeah, he writes much more about the taste of the
Madeleine
cookie and the lime tea.
So it is also really like deeply connected to our memories and emotion center.
Yeah.
What about the Met? How did you handle taste in the Met? Because
it's
not obvious.
Yeah. Well, they have cafes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I did that. But that was the hardest one.
Yeah. Can it change your experience of a space to be tasting something? Like,
yeah. And that's where it's tied to connection with other people, because I would never get anything to eat or drink if I was by myself, but I would do it often. If I was with someone else, we would stop and like get coffee or whatever. So it's very tied up in that, the conviviality of sharing food and drink.
Right. I mean, I think that's interesting to see that there's this one sense which we do share socially.
Yes.
Right? We're not really usually sharing smells socially.
Right.
In fact, when I hug my friends and I sniff them a little bit because I want to know the smell of all my friends.
Yeah.
I don't tell them about
No.
You can't tell them.
They don't want to know. Yeah.
You can't share that, but you absolutely share taste.
But it's funny how what an intimate thing it is to just even admit that you notice someone's smell.
Yes, exactly.
It feels very
personal,
dangerous
and
in
intimate.
a way. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It feels very. It's interesting how intimate it feels. Yeah, I like this phrase. It's your diplomatic odor. Your diplomatic odor is like when you've got your deodorant and your toothpaste and your shampoo and everything. That's your diplomatic odor.
Now, how does touch differ as a sense for you? You talk about skin, thinking about skin initially as. I think I'm quoting you as just like packaging.
Yeah. It didn't seem like a sense organ.
Right.
Touch feels very different. You can imagine all the other, like life without the other 4, but it's hard to imagine life without touch. And it is very. So obviously, one of the reasons that I undertook to do this book is because I was so out of touch with my senses. But one of the things, an illustration of how out of touch, again, like using all of the metaphors from the body that we use all the time, that I was I went into it thinking that I really did not appreciate the sense of touch. I was like, oh, this isn't important to me. Like sight is important to me, smell is important to me, but I don't care that much about touch. And what it turns out is I'm deeply, deeply affected by touch, and I didn't even know it. Like I love massage. I'm very, very sensitive to like textures of clothing. I will touch textures all the time. Like if I see something like moss, I have to touch it. I remember even as a child always being told in a store, don't touch it, don't touch it. That one of the things in the Met One of the things about is people are touching a lot of stuff. Like they're not supposed to, but they do. I don't, but
you have another recommendation on that front.
Well, like to touch the things that you can touch. Like
yeah.
there are the wooden benches, there's the cold railings, there's the marble walls. Like you can touch some things there. But it was surprising to me that I literally did not know that about myself until I started asking around.
Right.
Well, not asking around, but like looking at myself. What I found when I started asking around is how controversial silkiness is. Okay, how many people here do not like silkiness? I love silkiness. Does everybody love silkiness? No, Carolyn doesn't like silkiness. People there's a group of people who it gives them the chills, anything silky or satiny. And I was like, I thought it was sort of synonymous with pleasure, the way velvet was. So when I started asking around people's experience, again, there's just, people are having so many different responses.
Yeah. I love the idea. I love what you noticed too about all the tangible cues there are for us in the world. And like one of them that you mentioned is the little bumps on the keyboard.
Yes.
Right?
How long had I been typing before I noticed that? 1,000 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To position your hands. Does everybody know about that? Do you know what letters there are? Right. Like I think at some level we internalize it, but we don't make it explicit.
Well, and then my headphones had a bump too. I mean, there's things there that are to help us if we're paying attention, but we just don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. You have. I love that you're self-experimenting.
Yeah.
But then what you also do as an author is extend this to help other people go through their own journeys, right? And so you have a whole complimentary website that talks about how people can explore their senses, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did after the book came, once the book was sort of in production, is I realized that I wanted to create a quiz to help people figure out what their most neglected sense is. Because I went into it knowing or suspecting, and then I created the quiz and confirmed it, that my most neglected sense is the sense of taste. But when I would talk to people, a lot of times people didn't know what their most neglected sense was. They would often know what their most appreciated sense was. And why this matters is with your appreciated sense, like you love it and you tend to cultivate it. You look for opportunities to have adventures. You look for opportunities to engage with other people. You're often like trying to learn about it. You're very aware of all the sort of pleasure and comfort that it can bring to you. The reason why it's nice to know your neglected sense is because you neglect it. So it's low-hanging fruit. It's something that you can tap into. And what I found is that when you talk to people, when they find out what their most neglected sense is, they tend to get really excited and think about a lot of things that they would like to do, like adventures they would like to do, or things they would like to try, or things that they would do with other people. But also, I found a couple of, since I've done the quiz, and you can take the quiz yourself. It's just gretchenrubin.com/quiz, or just go to my site and you can find it. It's quick and free. It's super fun because it had to be a fun quiz since it's about the senses. With neglected sense, people would say, well, I knew I neglected my sense of smell because smells often trigger my migraines, or I have a lot of allergies, so I try to avoid smells. But then they would say, oh, but I realized that the smells of nature I don't have this problem, so I can really enjoy the smells of nature. Or there's this, I love the smells of cooking, and so I really want to, instead of just turning away from smell altogether, I want to find my own way to tap into it. So I thought that was interesting. Now, I don't make any scientific claims for this quiz, but one thing that is really surprising and interesting was that of the neglected senses, there's a very even distribution among the 5, which really surprised me. Like, I thought no one would have the sense of sight be neglected. But it's like uncannily evenly distributed. But of the most appreciated, the sense of taste and the sense of hearing are well in the lead, which are my 2 most neglected senses. So I think that's part of why I came to this at kind of an odd angle, because my experience is very different from most people's experience.
So this might be a challenging question because everybody will have a different neglected sense. But if everybody's going to walk out of this room tonight and wants to try to like light a fire
Right.
under their experience of one of the senses,
Right.
what would you recommend?
I would say take the quiz, figure out what your neglected sense is, and then really think of like what is something that sounds interesting to you. Like for instance, one of my most neglected sense is the sense of hearing, but I was very curious about a sound bath. So, figure out a way to go to a sound bath because it's just interesting and it's probably something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. One thing that is fun to do, and you could do this with any sense, is to do a timeline of that sense. So divide your life like into 4 or 5, time zones. So like childhood, college. I did childhood, college, law school, and then adulthood. And think of like, what are your most notable memories of that time? So what are the things that you remember most strongly? What are the things that you associate with that time and no other time? I did this with taste. It's super fun. It's a great, as you say, it's a great way to connect with memories because our senses are so connected to our past. And then you can reminisce with other people. So whether you did this with music, there's a wonderful, what's the name of this website? I think it's called Nostalgia Machine. And you can enter in a year and it will tell you the top songs for that year. And it's so fun because it will bring back so many memories tying into that. So you can do that with any sense you want. What were the things that stand out to you from that time and that sense? It's a fun thing to do.
Your family is in... Your family, well, actually, that's
they're
an
the
awesome
innocent
question.
bystanders.
They're in all of your work very deeply.
They are. Yeah.
How do they feel about that?
They're used to it. Yeah. No, they enjoyed this one. At first, they were a little skeptical, and then it turned out that all these things were really, and we did so many things that didn't even make it into the book. And so, because I'd be like, "You guys have never had Jiffy Pop popcorn? Like, we got to get on that." So they became very very enthusiastic.
Right. And one of the things you do, I think, along these lines, I'm reminded is you draw profiles.
Yes.
Profiles of each of them, which I think is an interesting way to think about each other.
Yes, this is a really, really fun exercise, and you can do it in a lot of different ways. So I did a 5 senses portrait of my husband. So for each of the 5 senses, I picked 5 memories, and again, it's like my most notable memories or impressions of him with each of the 5 senses, and it's a good creative exercise because it takes a lot of creativity and thought reflection to really come up with those like top 5. You can't just, at least I could not just like sit down and do it. And yet it's pretty easy to execute, because sometimes you're like, I can't draw. But this, you just write down the memory. And you really feel like you've created a portrait. So when we talked about this idea on Happier with Gretchen Rubin, the podcast, people started doing all these interesting things with it. So one thing is it makes a great gift because people really feel, like my daughter Eleanor did one for me, and you really feel kind of seen. It's interesting to do it for yourself. My editor made me do it for the book, for my About page, that I had to do a 5 senses portrait of myself. That was like that's an odd thing to do about yourself. Many people chose to do it of someone who had died, which was not something I thought of, but as a way to hold on to like these very tangible, concrete aspects of someone, and also to be able to convey them to to a grandchild who would never know a grandparent. Like it was very satisfying. Like for my, I write about how lava soap reminded me of my grandfather, the kind of the grittiness of lava soap, and I was doing a book talk, and like an elderly man came up to me with like practically tears in his eyes saying like how much he had lava soap reminded him of his father, and like doing woodworking with his father, and like how meaningful that memory was. And so, but you can also do it for a place, like maybe you go to Maine every summer, and so you do a 5 senses portrait of Maine, or you do a 5 senses portrait of your dog. Do you a 5 senses portrait of a vacation, of our trip to France. It could be like a family thing that you would do for Thanksgiving, like the 5 senses of 2023, or of our camping trip. So it's a very satisfying exercise. It feels very creative, and then it also feels like it's a very powerful way to hang on to these like very concrete impressions and memories.
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea, I think, because it really makes a person, our experience of people is very bodily, right?
Yes.
And it's reminding us of that explicitly. And I think it's all about just then bringing a new attention to our experiences and reifying them. And I think that's what you do so lovely. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
So I wanted to open it to questions. I'm sure there are people who have questions for Gretchen. And should people come to the mic? Or is a mic?
If you'd like to, you're welcome to, or just
for the,
and we'll repeat
yes, because
it.
there are people
But
in the
you get
live
it-
stream ether who will want to hear your question as well.
And you get a gold star if you ask the first question because nobody.
A gold smelly stuff.
That's right.
Scratching good stuff.
A gold scratch.
Yes, please.
So when you talk about this sense of touch, there's touching and then there's being touched.
Yes.
So how about that question?
Yeah. So touching and being touched absolutely is so important. We have like a whole network to allow us to experience social touch, which I think needs to be so much more researched. I'm deeply fascinated by that. And I think another very interesting thing that people are exploring is this kind of touch hunger and like people needing to feel in touch with other people. And of course, there's a lot of ways like getting a manicure, getting a massage, acupuncture, all these things that kind of allow people to, in a kind of socially acceptable and structured way, to be touched because there's such a hunger for it. And so that is very different from like touching moss or something like that. It's it is a big part of what connects us with other people. And of course, it's so powerful that there's so many social constraints around it. It's so important to understand how to do it kind of properly. It's complicated. It's complicated.
It reminds me too about how much we're talking about isolating these senses.
Yeah.
But the brain is involved at every level. So having an expectation about touching something is different than being touched by that thing or person, right?
Yes, right. Well, and then being in control, and absolutely.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really surprised me is I love massage, and I was very surprised that there isn't a lot of research because it's such an ancient practice. It's such like a universal practice and it's often associated with comfort and healing and the attentiveness of another person. And I just thought that there would be a lot of research into like how that operates and how to harness that. And so I was really, really surprised. I mean, I thought that there would at least be kind of like fakey research done by like people who were trying to like profit from it, because a lot of times you see those kinds of, even that stuff doesn't exist. So
bad research.
not even like the self-interest reading fake research. Yeah. So somebody should get on that because I am a big believer in the power of touch. And the human connection that it implies.
Yes.
Well, so want to speak a little bit about the taboos about touch. Like in a religious society, you're not supposed to touch a married woman. I guess I don't know how.
Right.
But the things you're not allowed to do. So when we meet one another for the very first time, do I extend my hand?
Yes. Right. So the question is about the taboos around touch. Well, it's an excellent point. There's so many taboos about touch, but there's so many taboos about all the senses. It's really interesting. In a lot of cultures, there's like things that are forbidden to see, that you're not allowed to see, or that you're only allowed to see very rarely. Back to the Met does a good job of, especially like in the Egyptian collection, presenting things in a way so that you see that they were not meant to be seen, which of course makes them all the more enticing. With food, one of the things that's interesting is there's so many taboos around food, and there are from something I read, it said that there is no culture that eats all available nutritious food. That there are foods that people will not eat, even if they are starving, because it's just food that you're not supposed to eat. Like you're not supposed to eat that grub or something. Whereas other people would be fine eating that food, but then there's other food they don't eat. So it is very interesting that our senses are so bounded by, and this is why I thought about writing about the sense of imagination, because it's our imagination that makes something kind of off. You see this, you write about this beautifully about
we stop dogs from smelling the way they want to smell because we feel like, well, it's inappropriate what they're doing.
Right.
But to a dog, it's like, this is the way that they're understanding each other.
Right.
Connecting with each other.
Yes, in dog culture, it's absolutely appropriate.
Right,
Yeah,
right. But to us, we're like, man, not.
Yeah, you wouldn't get that close to something or something.
Yeah, not there, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so it's really a fascinating aspect of it.
Yes.
I think it's interesting, sometimes the senses can bypass our analytical minds. I was on the subway the other day, just talking to a friend. All of a sudden, there was this overwhelming scent and a body odor. And my friend said, your eyes glazed. I could see that, he said, you stopped being able to comprehend what because that scent was so strong, it bypassed everything else. And that took me by surprise at how overwhelming it was. And it wasn't something I thought about, like, oh, I shouldn't like this scent.
Right.
It just grabbed me.
Right, so the comment was about like how the senses can bypass our analytical senses. Well, along those lines, a friend of mine said, oh, I smelled someone with Dracar Noir on the subway this morning and it ruined my whole day. That was my ex-boyfriend smell. So yeah, so it can even be, it is funny how it can just, sometimes you don't even realize what you're responding to. Have you ever like all of a sudden been, I remember I was walking and I was just overwhelmed by a sense of homesickness. And I realized it was because something had reminded me of summer camp, which, you know, I guess, even though I ended up loving it, somehow the smell got tied to the sense of homesickness. So it is very, very powerful.
And ancillary to that, you do discuss sometimes it's hard to focus on one modality or a task.
Yeah.
If another sense is active. So you talk about driving, for instance.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm a fearful driver, so I turn off the radio so I can see better. And then this is like a thing that I figured out. So I'm very sensitive to the sense of touch. But I also love sight and I love color. And so I was looking and I also am very against clutter. So I wrote a book about fighting clutter. And so I was looking at my closet and trying to analyze why there was a certain group of clothes that I liked, but somehow I never wore. And I was like, but I like these clothes, so why is it that I never choose to wear them? And I realized because I liked the way they looked, especially I liked their color, but I didn't like the way they felt. And I realized that when I was looking at myself in the mirror, trying something on, I would say, oh, it's such a beautiful color. But then when you're actually wearing something, you don't see it, but you feel it. And so I didn't want to wear these things. So now when I go to when I'm trying on clothes, I always close my eyes to make sure that I like the way it feels. Because in the end, if I don't like the way it feels, I won't wear it, no matter how much I like it. And so again, it's sort of like sight will trump feel if sight is activated. So you have to bring it out so that the other one can emerge and take hold.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Gretchen, I just wanted to thank you. I'm a volunteer at the Met.
Oh.
It's never in a million years did it dawn on me I could go there every day. And I heard your podcast or something, and I thought, well, that's my happy place.
Yeah.
I could go there every day.
Yeah.
And I started, as a volunteer, you can go anytime you want. And so I started going on my way to work.
Oh.
And it sets my whole day up. I'm
Oh.
happy. So I wanted to thank you.
Oh, great.
It's a great thing. Just a little thing.
Isn't it different when you go every day?
It's so different.
It's so different.
It's so different. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, I'm so happy to hear that. Well, we'll have to look for each other.
I was going to ask, you said something a few minutes ago, when you think of this, would you rate the senses? Do you think there's one that's more powerful than another one, et cetera?
In terms of the power of the senses, well, I do think we are hardwired for sight. It has the most real estate in the brain, and then hearing. So I would say those two. And touch is kind of hard to put in the other.
Yeah.
And I would think it's smelling, then tasting.
Well, I mean, it gets back to this, not just what your neglected sense
Right.
is, but what the priority is. When I
Yeah.
studied smell a little bit, I was interested in the fact that it sort of voted the sense I'd be happiest
Yeah.
to lose.
Right.
Right? But then when in fact,
When-
people go and lose it, then
Right.
they're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm
Yeah.
gonna reorder my priorities.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you start making a list
Yes,
like that,
you
you
realize-
realize it's complicated.
They're all
And furthermore, right, they're interwoven.
Yeah.
Right, importantly, and it's just us that needs to bring attention to them, explicitly draw them out as though they're really different, but they're part and parcel of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
They're part of your experience.
Yeah.
In the back, yeah. Yes.
Gretchen, please say a few words about genetics and senses
Oh,
in
yeah.
terms of, say, for example, why some people love cilantro and others do.
Right.
Or smell asparagus.
Right,
you know.
right.
And then also, are there aspects of dog smelling that is determined genetically?
Great.
Yes. Well, yeah, genetics plays a huge role. There are super tasters, and then there's the genetic difference that you talked about related to cilantro. People see color differently. I wondered if I actually tried to see if anybody had done research on whether people perceive color differently because they can't stand the sight of the new energy efficient bulbs, because some people are like extraordinarily bothered by it, like me, and other people seem quite indifferent. And like somebody was saying he would go in and he would see that all the bulbs were different colors, and somebody else would be like, oh no, those are all the same. So I'm like, what is this? Anyway, but so it must be something that people are picking up differently. Yeah, so it's very genetically. But one of the things that's surprising is how often people are really quite missing a sense. And they don't realize it. It's not uncommon for people not to know that they don't have a sense of smell until they are a young adult. It's not that uncommon for people to have quite significant hearing loss without realizing it. So I think we're all probably in really, really genetically different landscapes, and we don't know it because we just assume that people are experiencing what we're experiencing. And then in dogs.
I mean, I don't know that much research actually about the difference between dogs in terms of their genome and how that is expressed in terms of their ability and behavior. Of course, their genome is has much more committed to expression into olfactory elements generally, right? And there is a wide difference between different breeds where it mostly has to do with anatomically how many olfactory receptor cells they have, which just increases the capacity, right? Like having 3 receptor cells for color,
Right.
as we do in the eye, versus having 2 receptor cells for color, as dogs do in the eye. So when you have many, many more receptor cells in your nose, which is this little area at the back of the nose, you can smell more, right? And smell better. But it's very hard to quantify, and I don't think anybody's made the genetic, it's mapped genetically between bloodhounds and your golden doodle, right? Both of them are terrific, are much, much better smellers than we are in most respects. Although there are some places where humans out smell dogs, by the way.
Oh.
Like the smell of amyl acetate banana, sweet things, right? We have evolved to smell when something is ripe, and dogs really are indifferent to that, right? They smell all the other things. So we smell the ripe banana, and they're smelling at lower thresholds and much more wider variety of things. And that is obviously genetically encoded. There was a question.
I was curious, Gretchen, if you looked at the relationship between our senses and trauma. Not to bring her down.
Oh, right. No, I really didn't, though that is something that there is a lot of research. I don't talk about that in the book, but it's really important. And I know that it's something that is being increasingly looked at as both understanding like the triggering factors, and then also how to harness the senses for more kind of feelings of restoration and energy in a positive way.
Well, do you think there's enough sort of language talking about senses? Because I can find, if they want to describe what a banana tastes like, it would be, I don't know how I would put it into words, but sometimes, so basically one has to go to poetry or that kind of type of language.
Well, it's interesting. So for one of the things that I did is I went to Flavor University, which was this 2-day free workshop that anybody can do. It's in Geneva, Illinois. And I signed up for it, and they wrote me and they were like, we're not sure this is exactly the kind of, you're not the usual kind of person who comes. Most people are it's dog food research. But I was like, well, I'd like to come and feel happy, so I went, so you could go. But one of the things that was really interesting is they gave us a workbook that was just adjectives. So it would be for fruity, and then it would go, it would just have adjective after adjective to describe something. So if you were trying to describe banana. So I think actually you would have the language for it. Maybe not at your fingertips the way I'm not like able to rattle off the adjectives, but it was really interesting because one of the things we did there was taste comparisons, which is super fun. I really encourage everybody to do taste comparisons of things like apples or potato chips or something. Because you will really see that that things will taste very different from each other, even if they're in the same category. And if you have a list of adjectives, it's kind of like smell, where often we have a very difficult time identifying a smell, but if we have a choice of 5, we can pick it out. It's sort of hard to dredge it up, but then we can attach to it. And I was surprised where I was like, I don't know how I would characterize this slice of apple. But then they were like, well, is it acidic? Is it delicate? Is it fruity? Is it, it got much easier. So I think it's something where experts become good at it. But then even just having long lists can help you do that, because there is this it is hard to put words to it unprovoked or unprompted.
I find it so interesting that in many respects, I think with smell and taste, expertise is just knowing that vocabulary.
Yeah, right, it is.
Right?
Having it at your fingertips.
There are super tasters, right? But it's not that those people are always better at.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They aren't smelling any better. They're not more. They don't have stronger muscles. Yeah, they just have a greater expertise in talking about what they're experiencing.
Right.
But then also, so we both randomly in our research came across this guy Raymond Mass, and he talked about how being able to have a memory of it was very hard. Like being able to have a catalog where you could be like, this is the smell of this chemical, this chemical, this chemical, this chemical, this chemical, and just to be able to go through it and have a mental catalog.
The way we do with visual scenes, right?
Exactly.
We can set up.
Right.
Yeah, I can reconstruct what the Society Library looks like in my head because I can walk through the space and see it.
Right.
Right, and we don't have that as much with smell. But if we cultivated that, then we would be able to invoke those spaces when we're smelling something.
Or to divide it up and say it was a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this.
Raymond Matz designed the fragrance Happy, so
Yes,
it felt like it was perfect.
Yes, I felt
Perfect perfumer.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question, Ish?
All right, yes.
Well, one thing that fascinates me about senses is whether we have a choice or not. Just a very simple example, my husband loves mushrooms and I absolutely hate them. I wish I loved them because
I'm with you.
people just
Yeah.
seem to love them and they're good for you.
Yeah.
But I can't stand them. I can't stand the taste, the smell, the texture, everything. But it's not a choice. I would really like to like mushrooms, and it's the same with music. I've sort of spent my life in music, and there's a lot of music I absolutely love. There's also a lot that I just can't just put my teeth on it.
Right.
But there's no choice. And I sometimes think, where does this come from?
Right. Okay. So the comment is about how when it comes to our senses, a lot of times we don't have a sense of choice about what we like or don't like. Well, here's something interesting. That in many ways our tastes are formed by the age of 25. And if you have not tasted a cuisine and learned to enjoy it, or you haven't listened to music and enjoyed it by the time that you're 25, it's much more difficult to cultivate an active enjoyment of it later. And I saw this because I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and we had never had sushi. I mean, we didn't even have bagels. And I never have developed a taste for sushi. Now my sister, who grew up in the same household and lives in California, she has. And so I think if you're really exposed to it all the time, maybe if you were like, okay, I'm gonna eat one every day, maybe you could get yourself to do it. But you're like, who wants to? I'll go mushrooms. I don't want to eat them. I'm with you. But I do think that it's interesting that there does seem to be this kind of formation of tastes. So that I think that's part of it too. It's like what the brain recognizes as.
On the other hand, you learn to like the smell of garbage trucks. So
I did. That's true. I didn't say I liked the smell of garbage trucks. I wasn't just. I was more. I found it more bearable because I was able to see how it was a picture.
Fair enough. Yeah. All right.
With that.
Thank you, everyone. This is so fun.